Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Maybe I'm Just Not Getting It podcast. I am your podcast host, Robert Davis. Thanks everybody for tuning in as we continue trekking through the third season. Before we start, just wanted to do my, episodic plug. Follow me on social media. Facebook is Robert Trey Davis III. Instagram is RTD underscore III. Follow the podcast, like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. It is on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and YouTube. And like I say, every time I appreciate everyone for the views, the comments, the support. It means a lot as we continue to move forward. So, with that being said, with today's episode, just wanted to. Today's episode is going to be about a topic that I think is of immense importance, and yet, even though we hear about it all the time, it doesn't get, I don't think, enough topic or enough airtime on people's heads. And that's really, I think, is financial literacy, and more specifically, financial literacy in the Black community. And so, just before we started, just wanted to introduce my guest for this episode, my lovely wife, Ilyasah. How you doing?
Hello.
Yes, and Ilyasah has a wealth of knowledge in this area and a wealth of experience in terms of um, advisement and consulting in financial wealth and philanthropy, and thought, she would have a good perspective to bring to this conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate you inviting me. Excited to dig into this topic, you know.
Yeah.
All the songs talk about it. Money makes the world go round, cash rules everything around me. So, you know, this whole when we're talking about financial literacy and wealth, there's really so much we can dig into here. So,
It
let's
does.
get
I
into
mean,
it.
it is. It is. It's a million things to kind of get into, and I think to start. Just I think it. To start, the concept that money rules the world, and I think the knowledge of those finances and knowledge of those financial systems are crucial. To gaining wealth, to building wealth, to understanding wealth. And I think in terms of just of an introductory type of sense. Um, it's important to note that it just in terms of why this topic kind of exists. And I think one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this was because I think the Black community has historically struggled kind of with financial literacy and wealth creation, and that's for a variety of reasons. Systemic, sociocultural, socioeconomic. We could talk about that all day. But I think at the end of the day, the impact or the result of that has been that there has always been a lag behind of other races, primarily white, even Asian to some degree, in terms of just financial literacy, wealth creation, generational wealth, independence, or just even. And when I talk about this, it's not even, I think, talking about generational wealth or wealth creation in terms of like old rich people in mansions, but just living above the poverty line, I think is a good way of looking at wealth creation in this sort of instance. Because if a family, if a family comes from an environment where they stay below the poverty line and they are able to build through, wherever that is, whether that's ownership of property, saving of money or whatever the case is, and get themselves into that position where they're no longer living below that line, that's a form of wealth creation. So, I mean, I think, just I think it's important to note that, just that the Black community has kind of struggled with that, and just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on why, just to your perspective, if that's the case or why that's been the case.
hmm Well, I think, first and foremost, when you're thinking about like the Black community, and I know it's very easy to compare the Black community to other races and what they're doing. The reality is that like our starting lines Like we didn't have the same starting lines. So we just have to acknowledge and recognize that. But even though we haven't had the same starting line or the same privileges as others, there's still a lot of opportunity that exists. And I think that because where we have started and where we come from is not the same, that we also can think differently about how we are creating and building and sustaining wealth within our community. And really, I think at the root of that is just that, us coming together and thinking about how we can collectively um, pool our wealth to grow it. And so it's not that we aren't like, I just think with the lagging, we have some catching up to do, but that there are ways that I think we can do it differently and still build that wealth regardless of where it is that we are starting.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's ways, obviously, no matter where you start in the race, you're always in the race. So you always have a chance to kind of compete in it. So there's definitely
Hmm.
areas to kind of to make that happen. And I mean, I think back to the point of why, why I chose the topic is, I think that financial literacy and just the whole concept of it is essential to empowering and uplifting the community to be able to, be able to create on its own and not have to feel like it has to depend on something to be able to create well for it. And just to note that it's still, I guess, stigmas and barriers that kind of impact, at least in my opinion, that there still seem to be stigmas and barriers that kind of impact, I want to say the Black community's ability to kind of fully embrace this topic to a degree.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how many times have, from when we're talking with our elders and they might say something like, oh, when we're talking about insurance, oh, you trying to kill me. Or when you're talking about putting money in banks and some of them are like, I don't trust those banks and they're keeping stuff under their mattress and stuff. Like those stigmas are real. Those are things that our elders probably heard from their elders, and now we and our generation are hearing it and believing it and carrying it forward. And so I just think that's where going back to the community aspect and like having platforms like this one, we now have social media and so much. Like it's really important for us to educate our brothers and sisters who like just may not have a full understanding of ways that they can like just handle their money differently in order to grow it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. And I think to your point, we've all can relate to having come across those instances or examples of those sort of barriers where it kind of comes from those old cultural lines of thinking of, and just to be clear, they're coming from, it might be from a place of paranoia, but it's not from a place of from a bad place. I mean, it generally comes, it stems from real,
Real things. I mean,
real things that
the
concern. Yeah,
1920s, the stock market crash and people losing their money that were in the banks.
yeah,
And you're like, yeah, it definitely comes from real places. And like, we should be cautious. We should be aware and
yeah,
know that history. But that's where it all comes with like the knowledge and understanding, not just tell it like our elders do have a tendency to kind of just tell us things, but not give us the like reasoning behind it. And
yeah.
so it's on us now. We're the adults now, like we're the ones that have to do our own digging and fully like jump in on these topics and understand them and make our own informed decisions around it.
Definitely. And um, just to talk about why, at least I believe this matters, this topic matters so much. I think, the first, and to the degree kind of already stated that financial literacy is that first initial step, I think, in terms of wealth creation. Everybody talks about wanting to, I guess, be rich or wanting to create wealth or wanting to be their own boss or wanting, to be all these things. And I think the first step, like literally the first initial step to that is understanding that world. The understanding your money is the first step to creating it, and it's the most crucial step to retaining it. Because if you don't understand, I mean, most of the time when we see athletes or celebrities or something that have gone broke, went through mass amounts of money, made their money and lost it through whatever ways it is. Most of the times when you hear them, they interview them or something like that, they talk about how they did not, have a full understanding of money, or didn't have a full understanding of what was going on around them. And I think that financial literacy is big in terms of that because you don't have to be rich to be bad with money. There are poor people that are bad with money all the time. In terms of bad with spending it, bad with saving it, bad with distributing it out. Just whatever the case may be. And so I think that that concept of just understanding this world first is the first thing. I mean, is the most important part, and just that initial first step in 1,000 steps, I guess, of trying to get to that point. And oh no, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I want to jump in on that because so I well, you know this, but like I am a big fan on like all things personal finance. I watch all the television shows, I listen to the podcasts. And so Ramit Sethi, who is like one of the like just very popular personal finance experts, he has how he talks about your rich life and what that looks like. And so we can see on TV, this like lifestyle, this glamorous, like popping bottles and spending money, lavish lifestyles. Like that's what we see, but that's not what everyone's rich life looks like. And the way that he talks about your rich life is like, what do you value and what would you want to pour resources into? And so that could look like I want to travel every month, like that could look like I just want the freedom to go get gas and not have to like check my bank account when I'm going to get gas. Like that might be your rich life. And so it's really important for folks to like think about what is like visualize, have a goal because by having that goal, it's all going to come back to your attitude and mindset. If you don't if you don't know what you're working towards, it's hard to get motivated to know like why am I saving? I could just spend it. Why not just like
Yeah.
rack up these bills and not pay them? I don't need it. Like it's fine. They're not going to do anything to me, you know? And so, but if you have things you want to do, that can then be a barrier. So it all comes down to what's your attitude and mindset as well as you're like dealing with money, and you have to be in a right mindset, I feel like, in order to take these steps to be building your wealth, to be saving if that is your rich life. Like some
Yeah.
people their rich life literally might be I don't mind living paycheck to paycheck because I don't know how long I have to live and I'm just going to spend it. Like
Happiness
that
looks
might
different
work
for
for
different
you.
people. Yeah.
It looks different for everyone. Um, and you
Yeah.
might not have kids. You might say, look, I can't take it with me when I go, so I'm gonna spend it. So, like, want to also acknowledge that not everyone's like goals and where they're headed, like we're talking about the starting line's not the same, the finish line isn't the same also within the Black community or for anyone.
I mean, I think that's a great point in terms of just that mentality. And also noting that when it's talking about mentality, we're not talking about a good or a bad mind state, but just a difference in perspective or a difference in want or need. Because you're absolutely right. Um, and I think that's one of the things when we talk about financial wealth that kind of gets lost in the shuffle is that it seems that it's this perception that everybody wants the same thing. Everybody wants to be ultra rich, thousand mansions. But most people, in my perspective and opinion, and I could be wrong, most people don't. I think most people, for the most part, want to do well enough to where they live comfortably.
Mhm.
And to your point, that's some people's rich life. And it's respecting and understanding how to get you to that point. And I think, to kind of go to to stay with the mind state thing a little bit, um, it's going back to why I think this is important because one of the things I think is the that kind of serves as a barrier to this is this concept or this stigma that wealth building is inapplicable to you, or it's or just have a ignorance towards it. And the way I kind of always say phrase it is look. I mean, and I think the reason I bring it up right now is because I think you kind of hit on it in terms of everybody's rich life looks different. It's because this isn't a just a rich person thing or a white person thing or anything like that. It's literally for if you just want to retire comfortably, this is something that applies to you. You know, it's not, I think sometimes when we talk, especially when I was coming up, I think financial literacy is a bit more of a digestible topic for people. And it's more of I shouldn't say digestible, more of a sexy topic for people to talk about now. But I think when younger, it was something to where it was, if you're talking about this, it's like, oh, I don't have millionaire money. You're talking about financial wealth, financial literacy, and building wealth. Like, I don't have that sort of money. And I think it's breaking that concept and that stigma that this is a high monetary value type of thing and not just everybody, a general concept that everybody needs to learn.
hmm Well, I do think that there's a distinction between financial literacy and financial wealth. And I do think that at like financial literacy, those are, topics that I do believe everyone should have a basic understanding of. Folks should understand savings, check-ins, banks, credit, like there's some basic understanding there when it comes to finances that everyone should have. And unfortunately, we're not learning that in schools, and so that really is just kind of passed down. For the most part, they touch on it a little bit in econ, in economics, but and when we're talking about financial wealth, I feel like that's where we're getting much deeper. That's where we're starting to talk about life insurances. We're talking about investments. We're talking about estate planning. We're talking about like the generational wealth conversation. What are you leaving behind for those who come after you? And so, like, I can see where folks may not feel as though they're a part of those wealth conversations, and really, it's because first you need to have like this basic financial literacy understanding before you're ever ready to start talking about wealth building. But then I do think that there's an in between where they kind of start to meet each other because so many of us in our community, we're entrepreneurs. And so we're starting to build wealth, at young ages, and we may not have like the full basic financial literacy understanding just yet.
Yeah.
But that's where like it really is good for like you to have a community, have a village who's able to help guide you and teach you as you are launching a business to grow it and thinking of ways that you can take it to the next level if that is your goal. Like some people just love to make floral arrangements and that's their thing. And maybe they only want to do 10 of them a week and that's fine. They're capped out. But for those who do want to like make it to that next level, they want to be, the head floral person in the world who folks are referencing, like then that's where like you do need to do some learning. Like there are ways you get there
Mhm.
and knowledge is very key in getting you there.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. Is that knowledge is that thing? It's kind of like that. It helps you sharpen your tools to go forward. Um, and I mean, I think you bring up a few things here that I think are interesting points I just wanted to touch on. One is the concept that financial literacy, or I guess financial wealth, let me say financial literacy, but financial literacy applies to and financial wealth is more than just money or saving money. It's more than just, and I think sometimes people like the concept in the past had always been kind of the thing where like you were saying, like where older people, like, you're stashing money under your mattress. And I
Mhm.
think even in our generation, that same mind state still applies where it's like, I'm just throwing money in the bank. Like, I think a lot of people's ideas of saving financial, that building that kind of rainy day fund is your concept of, like your jar of money sitting on top of the refrigerator or a savings account. Like, and while those are technically methods of financial wealth building, is that they are outdated and not the most effective. I mean, savings accounts aren't bad, but you have other
Yeah.
obvious ways to go about it. And so, I mean, I think, and you're talking about things like, estate planning, like you were saying, in terms of just what to do with those assets once you're gone. Budgeting in terms of just, every month sort of identifying resources of where money's going, where it's not going. I think a higher understanding of banking, to a point that we talked about, to a degree of where I think outside of just checkings and savings, but of other, features
Mhm.
that banks have that people take advantage of. And I think people of other races take advantage of more than we do at times. Investments, I think that's becoming a bigger thing, obviously, in today's society, with the stock market and everything like that. But investments is still, I think, a wide, kind of like a wild west type of world of financial wealth building. Um, uh, and other thing, but another thing I wanted to talk about was that before I kind of lose a thought, um, with I think there have been multiple issues that kind of kept people out of this conversation. Um, to your point that you talked about a little bit in terms of just lack of resources, lack of assistance, lack of knowledge, and just how it can be hard on your own to obtain those or just get into spaces where that information exists or where those resources or where those opportunities exist. And I just wanted to pause to say I think those two elements are also things that kind of weave themselves into why some people don't enter in this conversation. Uh,
Mhm.
and because they're just not aware of it, and it can be intimidating or daunting when there's so many things that you're not aware of that you're trying to learn about.
Yeah. So when you're talking about like going beyond just saving money, there was this lady on I was either on Instagram or TikTok, but when I say she really ate with this line, she said you cannot save your way to wealth. You have to invest your way to wealth. And I remember when she said that, I got chills because I, as much as I'm in it, I'm reading, I'm doing the things, I have my checklist. Like I want to meet my goal for my emergency savings. I want to have my goal for saving for a house and for a car. Like, but it's all sitting in savings, right? And so, like, if I truly want to have financial wealth, I have to be thinking about investing. I have to be thinking about how am I growing this money beyond it just like getting its little, you know, 0.1, 0.2% sitting in an interest account. And so I learned that on social media. And I think, like, to what you're saying about lack of resources, that we are living in a time where we have at our fingertips so much where we're able to learn on this topic. There are so many financial literacy and financial wealth folks who are on social media, influencers who are giving us information. They may not be accurate though. So it is important to like double check your facts and like double check what people are actually putting out there, even if they are influencers. But it's out there. There's opportunity for you to learn and get in the conversation. And what social media also shows you is that there are people like you who are part of this conversation. Like literally, there is a social media influencer around financial literacy for everyone. And
Preach.
so it's finding the one you like you connect with and that you feel good about. You check a few of their videos and against like what is out there on in your secondary sources, making sure that it's actually real. and then like go in and make ha like update your algorithm. I hope this video finds people in their algorithm for them to know like there's a whole algorithm out there around financial literacy to help you be thinking about your money.
Yeah, I mean, agreed. I've talked about that in a previous episode about education that I feel like sometimes it's this reliance on kind of, I don't want to say an excuse, but this concept of, oh, it wasn't made aware to me, where there's millions of financial literacy down to things as simple for children to as complex of topics as you want it to be. So,
Mhm.
as easy as Googling it to YouTube, on every medium that we have, to like you were saying, you can go on social media, on X, on Facebook, Instagram, and watch reels of it. So I definitely agree with you on that. And I think, it's just important that people know that, what we're talking about in these things, they're not huge acts. Some of these like simple steps can go a long way in terms of just putting yourself and your family's future, or the people that you care about future, in a better position, by doing this. Um, and so like just wanted to kind of switch gears for a second and kind of just talk about a few, I guess, examples of this, of kind of like this financial literacy, of why I think it's important. I kind of talked about, well, why this matters, but just different examples of it, of different things, I guess, regarding this subject. Um, One that I wanted to talk to you about and just kind of get your thoughts on was this concept of kind of like the survival mindset. And I think the survival mindset is a something that kind of fights financial literacy. It's like I won't say it's arch villain, but it's what combats it. I think a lot in people's heads. And that's really just this concept. I think that financial literacy can seem like a a privileged type of thought, or a privileged type of concept to bring up when people are living in that survival mindset of paycheck to paycheck, or I'm just trying to make it through the day. But the reason I bring it up is that it's still, if you're trying to get out of that survival mindset, one of the, I mean, not easiest, but one of your first steps to do so is going to be some sort of increase in your financial knowledge, whether it's your financial literacy, or if it's just not increasing your knowledge of what bills I'm paying, or anything. So I guess the first thing I just wanted to ask, in terms of, for somebody watching this that may be living in that survival mindset, how do you kind of reconcile with that, living in that and saying, I want to be more financially literate, or I want to embrace this world more?
Mhm. Well, one, if you're living in it with a survival mindset, like that is valid. If this feels overwhelming, that is valid. If this feels like out of reach, like, you know, be hopeful. Like it isn't. Like there are, but you have to take care of yourself first. So what like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like for all of my folks in psychology, what it tells us is that until your basic needs are met, you cannot like kind of go into this like self-empowerment and growth and all of that. You're thinking about like, where's my next meal coming from? So we just have to recognize that. And so, what the hierarchy of needs says is like making sure that you have food, that you have stable income and a stable job, employment, a roof over your head, that your health is taken care of, that you are in good relationship with others. And until those basic needs are met, like it's really hard for you to jump in and be thinking about financial literacy. But you can always educate yourself, if this is a topic that you find interesting, something that going back to the whole attitude and mindset when it comes to money, if you're visualizing what your rich life looks like, what it looks like for you to come out of this, then like dive all in, like lean into it, continue to learn, continue to figure out how can I make these steps, still like prioritize your basic needs because those have to be met first, but like you can still, take 5, 10 minutes a day to read something, or watch a video, or do something to make those to take those smaller steps that'll lead to bigger change.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I mean, I think to your point, when you're in that stage in that survival type of mindset, you have to make sure that you're living first. I forget the quote from Atlanta. The dude went off, but it's like essentially, the guy was saying, you can't think about such things like budgeting or saving money when you're hungry. Like, you know, so I definitely get that, and to anybody to exactly your point, if you're facing that situation, you know, it's getting every day, making sure that you're covering that basic needs until you, and just putting aside anything you can until you can work your way out of it. And it may be slow, but it's still a day at a time. If that's what it takes to get there, then that's what it takes to get there. Um, and the next thing I want to kind of to talk about, or in terms of that, was just um, money management. I think in terms of this financial literacy conversation, money management. Um, People always talk about money management being key. And when I say that, some of the things I'm talking about in terms of that is things like budgeting, prioritizing, I think is big in terms of what is an expense compared to a need or a want. Well, prioritizing expenses in talking about needs versus wants. Um, I think debt awareness in terms of money management is also a big thing here because I think sometimes debt people don't take debt seriously, which can also increase kind of like your, which also can be a threat to this financial literacy type of conversation. And so just kind of want to get your thoughts on kind of just the concept of how effective money management techniques are in this era. I mean, in this area.
Money management is super important, but like I can rattle off right now with your budget. Make sure that you're not spending more than 30% on your housing expenses. Make sure that you're breaking down your budget and you're thinking about what are your absolute you must have. And so that's your bills, your like lights, your house, your like you can't go without eating those things, versus what is just a want, which is, you want to go to a concert, you want to have a subscription to Netflix, things like I can rattle all of this off. Pay your bills on time. You shouldn't allow the interest to accrue. Pay your credit card off in full. Make payments every other week on your car, on your mortgage, and you'll pay it down quicker. I can rattle all of these things off, but the reality is, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, attitude and mindset. If you are not in a place to receive that, you're not in a place where you actually want to take those steps, it doesn't matter. We could talk all day ad nauseum about all of this. If you don't want to do it, you're not going to do it. So it all starts with what is your mindset and do you want to make a change when it comes to money?
Definitely. I mean, I couldn't sum that up better myself, especially when you come to money management. I think nobody in the world is unfamiliar with the concept of money. So I think in terms of management of it, you're right. It is all internally how you perceive it at that point. Um, One thing I wanted to ask you, because this is something I've always found very interesting, and I think it very much ties into this financial literacy and wealth conversation in terms of credit. And you have a much better understanding of credit and use of credit than I do. I very much have a old Black person's understanding and use of credit. I don't trust credit that much, but I was taught not to trust credit. You very much understand and are able to work with credit cards and stuff like that. And I think it's important. And why I wanted to ask you this is somebody, because it's not too many people, I really think, especially younger Black people, that have a appreciation and are not scared or intimidated by credit, and a knowledge of credit. And so I wanted to just kind of ask in terms of that, why do you think that is, or why do you think credit has become is kind of like this big bad wolf to people in terms, credit scores, just how the system work, like the whole thing. Like it's kind of have this big bad wolf perception of people.
Yeah, it's a lack of understanding. I think also we were told like for those who don't know, my husband and I, we went to high school together. We sat in the auditorium, and what did they say to us before we graduated? When you go to college, don't get those credit cards. They're going to be in the pit or
They're gonna be
on
high interest,
campus.
and they're gonna be high
It's going to be
interest, and you're
high
gonna
interest. Don't sign up for the credit card. We were told that. And how many TV shows do we see that storyline? One on One definitely had one. Moesha definitely had one.
they all
Like
have one where they got a credit card, and then
they
they by
all
the
got
end of
a
the
credit
episode they had
card.
to get rid of it. Yeah,
And so, like, these are the messages that we have received when it comes to credit is that just don't do it. Don't use it. Don't like just no. You see it in an application, you get it in the mail, you rip it up. There's nothing you don't have to do anything with your credit.
yeah,
And so that's why
yeah.
that's
That's
why it
true.
gets a bad rap. And I think for me and why like I have become like just I read up on it. I read up on credit and I realized that like if you know how to work it, it works great for you. You mean I don't have to spend my money to book this flight that I might cancel. So you're not going to take it out of my account. I put it on my credit card, and then if I cancel it, you're just going to put it right back on my card, and I don't have to pay that off. Like it's not my money. I mean, it is. It's tied to my name, but like you're not taking it out of my account right now. And so, like, you just have to know how to work it. I can say that, like, I have had a credit card since I was, I think, 19 years old, and I've never paid interest on a credit card. But what that means is that you have to also be disciplined enough that when you swipe your card, that you know you do have the money to pay it. Uh, and that you aren't going to accrue that interest. There's also like, we can get into the nitty gritty. There's lag time that comes with credit. So like you might not have it right when you swipe the card, but you know you're going to have it by the time you have to pay that bill. And so that's where it does come with the discipline of you have to also be up on it. And then we get into points, and I can get on I know you love to talk about your soapbox. I can get on a soapbox around some credit card points and like how now you're making money by using these credit cards. So like not only are you not paying all that interest that people have told you, but you're actually getting money. Like I'm telling you, a credit card company actually hates to see me coming because they don't make money off of me, but I'm making money off of them. And so that's where you have to like just know the system, have the knowledge, and then have the discipline as well. If anyone ever wants to talk credit
You
card
the person.
recommendations, anything, just let me know because I've probably had quite a few of the credit cards that are available to us.
I'm
So,
I'm sure that you have. I'm sure that you have. And I think the switch from credit, I think, because I think you've hit the nail on the head pretty perfectly with that one in terms of that. Another thing I think that, and going down the line from one thing that you focus in on to something that I focus in on, estate planning is important as terms of a generational wealth building. Obviously, being something that I meet with people and talk with people and prepare stuff for them for. It's in explaining to them kind of just in terms of estate planning, you're talking about, wills, trust, even things like power of attorneys or just anything to protect your assets or your estate. And, just in terms of this being important because it is another way to transfer wealth. And quite frankly, it's one of not just the oldest, but probably one of the most efficient ways to transfer wealth in terms of just how generational wealth has been transferred from families through down, through in.
if
Um,
you don't have your paperwork in order, it can't be passed down. So,
right.
you got to have your paperwork in order.
I think the biggest issue that happens with this in terms of when I meet with people is that oftentimes they don't think they have enough to, they don't have enough that matters. Or I don't have anything to pass down. Like you might have a car, you might have that. Like even if you don't feel like you have a lot, you still have things. And if you have things, you have a lot. Like so, just in terms of that, I mean, in terms of that, for anybody that's watching, I would, encourage you to, especially with your, the people in your family, elders or not, to talk to them about if they have a will, if they have, um, any sort of will or plans in place, power of attorney who's handling their decisions if they're unable to make those, because those are another other ways to protect assets where we see sometimes, especially in the most extreme version with some of these TV shows of, oh, so and so came in at the last second and had a relationship with a dying woman, and then she wrote everything in her will to him or something. Just these extreme examples of people, or families fighting at the funeral over who getting such and such money and stuff like that. And just these are again ways to transfer wealth. I mean, a lot of times you can have. I mean, if a sharecropper could come into ownership of a farm and will that to his children, and they will that to their children, they will that to their children, and that's a way of passing ownership of property through several generations, just through that one thing alone. And so
I
that's
have
something.
a I have a question for you because I know we're talking about passing down wealth, but to the point of maybe I don't have that many assets, but also like I feel like something that's also important to bring up here, especially around wills and power of attorneys, is that I do feel like in our community we also wait a very long time before we ever begin to think about or create these documents. And
Mhm.
so, are there like life event triggers or anything? Like, when would you recommend actually going about creating like your estate plan or even thinking like at a basic level about what comes next when we leave this earth?
I mean, I would think that's a good question. I would say life events are definitely benchmarks to go by. I think to your point, a lot of times in our community, the life events that we wait on are like a severe illness or a severe incident. Like, so yeah, it's not best to wait until you have a heart attack to say, okay, now I'm gonna write a will when I'm in the hospital. Like, I think those are generally what we wait on. I think if anything, it should be maybe birthdays. It should be uh, ages. I think if nothing else, like, oh, I just turned 30. Maybe it's time for me to look at
Hmm.
drafting a will. Oh, I just turned 40. It's time for me, if
Yeah.
nothing else, that. If it's not when I had kids, maybe it's time for me to consider that. Or, oh, when my mother passed or when my mother fell sick, maybe it's time for me to consider that. I think, if I think there's different ways to judge those. I mean, any sort of life event, I think, at once where you should consider it.
Hmm.
But those would be what I suggest. But I do agree. I think oftentimes we have a tendency to wait until things get drastic, or it's like you're doing it at the last second, 24 seconds left on the clock, and everybody's trying to get something done where it's
Yeah.
almost like a deathbed type of will type of thing. And
Hmm.
yeah, and I think that's mainly because sometimes I think, especially in our community, we view estate planning. I was talking to a lady today, and she was just talking about how this was like she was saying, and she was a single lady, she didn't have kids, and she was saying how this was scary for her, so she couldn't imagine how it would be for somebody with children or a family. In terms of, I think this is some stuff that people don't, just for one reason or the other don't like to talk about, because it is to a certain degree facing your own mortality. And that's not a comfortable subject for everybody. And so I think, the more often that you get comfortable with being uncomfortable in that, the better. For any sort of life event, I think it is the right time to look at it. It's never too early because you can always revise it. Like, it's never too early.
And I think that is a very important important piece. But I first want to ask one question before I piggyback on that, which is it expensive to like get a will or a power of attorney?
No, I mean not at all. I know different people charge different amounts, but no, I mean generally I do wills. I mean for people for $100 sometimes. Like it's not it's not expensive at all. Depending on who you, I mean, you go to, and wills can be as simple or as elaborate. Any of these documents, any of the estate planning documents, wills, trusts, all of them can be as simple or elaborate as you want to be. When you get into like more elaborate type of documents like trust and things, it might be more setting it up, which costs a little more. But essentially, in terms of the distribution of assets part, they can all, I mean, be as elaborate as you like.
Yeah. And then what I just want to say around what you said about like have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, like that is such a great point where I feel like when we're talking about generational wealth, and the passing of assets, and again, like when you talk about wealth, like when I think about wealth, it's just like, am I putting those who come after me in a better position than I had when I started? And so if my parents were to leave me nothing, and then I am able to leave my kids enough to bury me, like that is a little bit better than what
Mhm.
I had, like that right there is wealth. Like that is like you are building some wealth for your family. And so I say that to say that like as that happens, it is important that we have the conversations that we are talking within our families, within our Black community about like what happens. There's so much that like we don't know. We don't know how, like some people don't know how they're going to pay to bury their loved ones. And so passing that knowledge to one another and also having the conversations, like maybe your children don't know how to go like what that process is, but if you know because you had to do it for your parents, like pass that down and make sure that your kids know and understand. Don't just like feel that you need to protect them or keep them away. Like that is knowledge that is so important and so key, I feel like, and we just have to get better about having these conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I definitely agree with you on that, and I think um, one thing I wanted to bring up, and to a degree, we kind of talked about this in terms of credit as well. In terms of just there being a historical mistrust of banking. Not
Mhm.
I mean, I think banking is, I mean, just as what we talked about with other elements here, it's a, a crucial, almost necessary element of wealth creation. Like you're not going to be able to amass but so much wealth without having some sort of banking relationships, bank accounts, or anything of that nature. I do think, for the same thing that we talked about with credit, that the Black community has had a historical mistrust of banking. Um, and for good reason. But I think that's always been a issue that's always kind of lingered. Um, and I think we view it as kind of like almost a trap or a game where if you don't fully understand it, you can lose. And if that's the case, I think it's still on us to make better decisions or be more knowledgeable to make better decisions that benefit us in terms of when it comes to banking and choosing what banks that we choose to operate with, making sure that that banks are FDIC protected or FDIC insured, I guess I should say. Um, just making sure that even with the accounts that we choose, that everything doesn't have to be like you said, just a checkings or a savings. You can do a money market account. You can do bonds. You can do different things to put your money in different ways. And so just, I
But
think,
that takes financial literacy, like we were saying, like
yeah,
for you to even understand what is a bond, what is a stock, what is um a money market, like what does it mean if my stuff is invested? Does that mean that it can go down? Like those are all questions that like go to your financial institution and ask them. If there's mistrust in a bank, ask the questions.
yeah. And I mean, and I think you kind of segued into the next point I wanted to ask about because I think, and the next thing I wanted to ask about was investments. And because, and when I think investments is a very hot topic. People we especially see everybody talking, with the stock market. Crypto was I think also a very big thing that kind of came up over the past few years in terms of just an emerging market that's kind of like virtual. I think investments in the concept of virtual ways to virtually make money. I think
Hmm.
is a growing trend. I think it's very risky, but it also is very risky, and it also requires a high amount of financial literacy. I think to really be effective or to really understand that world. And the reason I bring this up is I think, at least in my opinion, and I want to get your thoughts on it and see how, I mean, what you viewed or what you have observed. I think that it's a lot of people jumping into this world of investments, whether it be, like I said, stocks, crypto, bonds, different sort of measures. And they're jumping into this world, I think, I don't want to say prematurely, but just I think people are losing money, especially with stocks.
Hmm.
With the stock market, I think people are playing overly risky, and it's not that I don't think they are fully understanding of the risk. I just don't think they're fully appreciative of what they're doing. Or they don't take the full gravity of what they're doing. But I think when we've seen things like the GameStop um, rush that happened a few years ago where they were buying and selling GameStop stock, or the Dogecoin, the thing with Elon Musk and the pushing the Bitcoins and everything like that. I think that people have kind of seen stock market investment turn more into a game, so they're treating it like one.
Yeah,
And I
but your
think
money's not a your money's not a
that, yeah,
game.
that's
Like
the point.
you
Yeah,
you have to do your research. Like don't just, and also again with when going back to mindset, like if it is a game, you need to know that it's not coming back. So, like, do you have some discretionary money that you're able to just kind of play with and see if it grows? If so, great. If not, put it to the side. But when it comes to investments, you have to know your risk tolerance. And so, risk tolerance is how much risk are you okay with taking? And so there are people who are like very low risk that are conservative, and which like having something like a bond is fine. You put your money in, like it's really not going to fluctuate that much. When it comes to stocks, do your research. There are stocks out there where you can have that conservative risk of like, oh, over the last 20 years, you can see it really has only fluctuated 0.1%, 0.2%. And so, like, you're also not getting as much money, it's high risk, high reward. But you also may just like be okay with making a little bit of money and knowing that you're not going to take a loss. There's then moderate risk and then there's the high risk. And so with the high risk, like, yeah, you might hit big, for those people who put money into crypto, maybe they put $1,000, $2,000 and they came out with like 20, 30. Like that was like wasn't that like a 1 day fluke or like a 2 day fluke? And then it went right back down. And so like you just like also kind of if you are high risk, you're probably someone who is going to want to be checking it constantly. And so like with your mindset and your mental, like is that something you want to be doing? Them day traders who are literally at their computer all day long, like to make money, like that's just a whole nother world that I don't think we should get too much into. But like risk tolerance, that goes into basic financial literacy. You need to understand what that means in order to make some decisions when it comes to how you're going to manage your money.
I agree. Nah, I agree with you. I think there are costs associated with being uberly successful in those high risk, high fluctuation worlds that people don't fully consider, like time, effort, that, when you're in those worlds, you have to really commit to. An hour,
Mhm.
it could be a day, in terms of that. So, yeah, I mean, and um, a few more examples I wanted to bring up, and these are more ones I think that are more common towards, I think, the common person. First, just the plug for me in terms of fraud protection. It's your simplistic steps. I mean, and I don't know why people don't do it more, but just things like monitoring your statements, your billing activity, not sharing your info, asking, like you said, asking questions to your
Mm.
bank. I think to your bank or to your financial institutions, or I think just those people, like those are simplistic things. Those are also ways. Those are also common forms of financial literacy. It's ways of building wealth, of monitoring your money, monitoring your spending, monitoring your habits. And just kind of wanted to, again, put for people that's listening, those are always things to do. Um, but one thing I wanted to ask you about is this topic of, not this topic, but this mind state, the get it in blood mindset. I think that's one thing that has, especially amongst the younger generation, our generation and younger, I think it's become extremely prevalent. And when I say get it in blood mind state, I mean, what I'm saying is I think where people are taking on a debt or an expense with the full knowledge of, I know I'm not going to pay this. They are just, if they're going to get it,
Uncle Sam always wins, Robert. Like Uncle Sam is always gonna win. Uncle Sam is like when you say get it in blood, like Uncle Sam is gonna get your blood. Like he gonna get it. Like so I just think that like that's just a terrible mindset. And if that is the mindset you're operating in, like where does that stem from? Is that stemming from like you're not expecting to like live much longer and so it's like, oh, well, you're just gonna get this. Like the reality is that like for someone who's going to be here in their 60s, 70s, 80s, like they're gonna get that money. And so it's only gonna harm you in the long run. So we're talking student loans, people who aren't paying their student loans. You see that they're putting everything in place to make sure that they get their money. All right. So like student loans, medical bills. People love not to pay their medical bill. Well, an emergency happens and insurance denies you because you haven't been paying your medical bills and now you SOL and you 50, 60 years old, you need this. Like so like you like just you have to like try to think beyond today. You have to think for the future.
I would agree. I mean, and I think you summed it up perfectly. I don't think enough people, especially with younger, our age or younger, I don't think enough people think. I don't think people don't think that they won't be living there. I think that it's just a concept of not having the foresight of it. Like I'm not in the concept of thinking about tomorrow. I'm only thinking about today. Or even what I think is an even worse or even more desperate frame of thought is I just don't care what happens tomorrow. Not even like, and I think that's really what kind of catches me is that I think more people are recklessly taking on debt of a lot of different forms because they're like, I don't care. Or I know I can't pay this back, but I don't care. And whatever happens, happens because I have no care about what happens. And I think that's a very dangerous type of concept to be in, that and just that to your point, the get it back in blood thing just never puts you in a good position in the long run.
Hmm.
And then the last kind of example I just wanted to talk about was the get rich quick mentality, kind of like your scheming. I think sports betting is become a huge and not as women are impacted by it, but it's more of a huge epidemic among men in terms of that. And it's just what I would say that generally these get rich quick mentality does not work usually. When we were younger, we saw things like what was it, forex, wake up now, all that sort of stuff that came and fizzled out, and you'll see it more and more. I think, and like I said, I think now it's more sports betting and online gambling is become the new get rich quick scheme because we see so many people that are that they don't show how much they might lose in a day, but it's I made $5,000 off of this bet, or I made such and such money. So and it's real quick, it's quick, it's easy, and I think that these are just traps that people can fall into, and understanding the risks that come with that, or understanding kind of just what how do these things look for people, what like they look for it in order to make you spend that money, is a way of, again, of financial literacy, of just of empowering and enriching yourself and trying to navigate those minefields. And so, just again, my plug for anybody that is into those, just to be aware. But just want to go through a few concerns I had regarding this. And like concerns I have regarding this topic is, I think first we talked about this, is that just poor financial literacy can lead to choices that impact you. It can impact your spouse, your partner, your family, your descendants, your business, so on and so forth. Like if I had poor, if I had, if I was making poor financial decisions, it would impact you as my wife. Like there's no way that it wouldn't, because we would be blinked in that regard. So, I think, people, and the reason I say this is I don't think people think about, sometimes people don't think about this in a concept that's bigger than them. Like, sometimes these decisions that you're making have more of an impact on those around you than just yourself. And so if that's something, and that can lead people to be more, um, precise, or be more, um, I guess, intentional about their decisions or about their habits. Um, Another concern I have is that there's just a lot of misinformation, scams, schemes, and I think you kind of hinted at this a few times. There's a lot of stuff that prey on kind of like the uninformed, the desperate, those that just kind of like trying to push through. And I think identifying what those are, or identifying just kind of what's real and what's fake here. I mean, you kind of talked about it in terms of like even with your influencers, of like you might find a financial literacy influencer, but you also have to check to see, just to make sure that what they're saying is accurate, because there are people that are just saying stuff online. Um, and so I think, just being able to identify what is misinformation or what is not good information to take, I think is key in terms of this. Um, One thing that I think is really killing people, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it, are payment plan options. Things like, I think, Klarna, Afterpay, stuff like that. And it's not that I think they're bad, but they can be pitfalls into debt. And I think that the more that we make everything a payment plan option. Like I understand payment plans for big items, I understand them, but I think, in terms of, I forget the company they went over, but they had to write off for so many when they were trying to give, I think, like after-pay options on stuff like DoorDash. Like you shouldn't. I don't believe you need to give an extended pay option on like your McDonald's from that you're door dashing to your house.
Mhm.
And I think, that people are more likely to do that because they'll look and say, do I want to pay $15 now, or do I want to pay $5 now, and then whatever else later? And they don't really think about the concept that you're paying more in interest, or if you don't pay this, then it's a bill that may start, a debt that starts to accrue against you, and blah, 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 blah. But I
I
think,
think that when we're talking about these, that we have to like to something that we talked about earlier about the survival mindset, that for some people they trying to eat and like they're not thinking about
sure,
interest or anything. They're trying to eat, so they're gonna climb and they're gonna afterpay. But if you are in a place where your basic needs are met, all right, so we're establishing that is the base. You have food in your fridge, you have a roof over your head, that you're thinking about Klarna, Afterpay, all of those other options, it works if you work it. All right. And that goes for like what I was saying earlier around credit. If there is a way that like you should not like you shouldn't pay money to like why pay more for something like it doesn't increase the value of it. So, like, you have to really think, does you having these outfits from Shein, like, do you really need to pay all of this money right now to get these outfits? Or is it better for you to wait until you have the $70 for the stuff in your cart in Shein and then be able to order it straight out? Like, again, it all goes back to attitude and mindset.
Yeah, I agree. Um, and then, we talked about my next point. I think, apathy, ignorance, intimidation, these are all barriers that, especially the Black community, have come across where you've seen things like consistent poverty, consistently feeling like there's a lack of opportunity, consistently feeling like there's a lack of belief in success. I think are all things that the Black community have struggled with that have led to kind of like this issue or this lack of financial literacy or this lagging of financial literacy. I think that those are just issues that we're always going to be dealing with until more people, I think, feel like they're in positions to where they're doing better. You're always going to have that. Um, we talked about the live for the day mindset or the survival mindset. Um, Both of those, I think, like I can understand the survival mindset more because that is from a concept of survival. To live for today, like I just don't care about tomorrow. I think that's just more just being like, oh, like fuck it, I don't care. But both of those are short term initiatives that don't breed long term planning or long term success.
It
And so,
doesn't. Well, also, when you think about, like, for my millennials in particular, this live for today mindset is hard. Like, we're fighting against what we have been told for a long time. All them songs that were telling us we need to live for today, YOLO, like that, like that's what we were told as we were coming into money, YOLO, the whole,
yeah,
what's that, Neo and Pitbull song? Um, I knew my rent was gonna be late about a week ago, but I'm still at the club popping bottles. Like,
yeah.
like we have heard this, okay? But like, y'all, we are the adults now. And so we need to overcome this. We need to be like, it is tomorrow. All right. We live for today. It's tomorrow. So now we need to like get our stuff in order. And we know tomorrow might come. So like we got to be ready for it.
And then one question I wanted to ask you, I know you've talked about this. Um, we talked about the educational resources that are out there for people. Um, and I know we talked about how those resources exist, and they're easy to find, and they're plenty. In terms of they're accessible. Um, the concerns that I have, and I bring this back up, is that we don't take advantage of resources. And I think sometimes, back to the point that you were saying, oftentimes the first rebuttal to that or excuse to that is, I wasn't aware. But oftentimes I think people, even if they're not directly aware something is, they're aware of how to find it. So they are aware. Like if you wanted to, if you like, I doubt that most people, if they wanted to understand any of the stuff that we're talking about, they wouldn't know to just say, I can just Google this, and something will pop up. Like I think that common concept. Yeah. And so the question I ask in terms of that is, um, and you may have a different perspective, so let me not put words in your mouth, but the question I've always had to myself is, why do we not take advantage of these resources that we know are out there the way that I believe others do?
We really might not know though. And so my question to you is like, amongst your friends, have you had this have y'all talked about money and wealth
Mm-hmm.
amongst
We
your
have,
friends?
but I also will say that I know that we aren't the prototypical, or every friend group isn't going to be working like that or have those sort of conversations either. So I
How
don't.
often are y'all talking about it?
I mean, I think to a degree, I don't know to say how often, but we have an investment club. So, like we do talk about like money and investments and things of that nature. Um, we, me and Chris follow up on it, every once in a while in terms of talking about it. So maybe I can't even say every month. I can't even say it's that frequently in terms of as a group.
Mhm.
But
But that's great that you have an investment club. I just posed that question because I really like, yeah, we know it's out there, but also like I feel like that's coming from a place of privilege of like we're also in places like through our careers, through our families where like yeah, we do know about these resources where we can reach out and touch and like easily access them. We know how to rig our social media to like have the algorithm to have the things that we want it to have. Like I love to travel and so I have a lot of travel finance that shows up on my feed. But like literally some people just might not know. And so I pose that question around when's the last time you talked about it with your peers because I really think that's the key for those of us who are tuning in if anyone is still here in your podcast, like listening to this, like they have an interest, they now have some, or they've had some knowledge on this topic. And so it starts with a conversation. Like, just talk to your friends, ask them, like, oh, have you, like, done anything with stocks? Oh, do you have a credit card? What credit cards are you using? Like, it's really, I think, and that's where the resource sharing can begin, is person to person.
that's it. I mean, I definitely think so. I think we all have to share knowledge with each other in order to build up that wealth, to build up that well or that base of knowledge within the community. Um, and so, yeah, in conclusion, just to kind of wrap up, the episode, I think the Black community definitely has increased their level of financial awareness over time. Like from where I can say where how this concept was looked at when my parents were coming up and how they talked about it, how it was explained to them compared to how it was explained to me and you, compared to how we talk about it, I think is a world different. And it is reflective of growth and, growth of a community in this space. Um, and, I think just for people watching this, that financial literacy, again, it applies to everyone and we all have to make we all have to make money. We all have to buy things. We all have to pay bills. And so this concept is going to apply to you whether, you think it does or whether you want it to or not. And if we all take small steps in the right direction, the impact that we could have will be tangible in terms of just the money that we could save or the wealth that we could create or the opportunities that we could create for ourselves, for our descendants, for our contemporaries, so on and so forth. Um, and just that we must create the wealth in the Black community that we seek, because no one will do that for us. And if we sit around and we wait for opportunities to present themselves to create wealth, that will never happen. We have to be the change that we're looking for. And so with that, Ilyasah, is there any final words you'd like to give before I sign off?
I think just adding to that, that like there really is a lot of power in the collective. And so like I know I just said like have a conversation, but then like take it a step further. How are we pooling our resources? And like um I just like in the Black community, you can trace back in our roots and you can see like susus are something that like our ancestors were doing where we were, pooling our dollars and supporting people in order for them to launch businesses. You're talking about an investment club, like that has historical roots all the way back to like the 14, like it has roots all the way back to where our ancestors were doing that over in West Africa and pooling their money to get businesses started. And so like let's lean into our roots a little bit more. Let's think about how we can really build our collective power when it comes to financial wealth. And that looks like not just money itself. That also looks like us pooling our knowledge, pooling our stories, in order to move our community forward.
Well said. Very well said. Well, everybody, that is our episode. I would just like to thank everyone for tuning in. Again, this is the Maybe I'm Just Not Getting It podcast. Follow me on social media on Instagram, RTD underscore III, Facebook, Robert Trey Davis III. Again, follow, like, subscribe, comment, podcast. It is on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and YouTube. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. Again, this is your host, Robert Davis. We will see you at the next episode, everybody. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye.